The day the internet went quiet was a day that changed Nepal. On a seemingly ordinary morning in early 2025, citizens woke to find their digital world had, well, just shrunk. Facebook was suddenly inaccessible, Twitter was suddenly inaccessible, TikTok was suddenly inaccessible. The government of Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli had, with a swift and decisive order, pulled the plug. This wasn't a technical glitch. It was a deliberate act of state policy, a move that sent a chilling message across the Himalayan nation. For millions of Nepalis, these platforms weren't just for entertainment. They were vital for news. They were vital for business. They were vital for connecting with family abroad. And they were vital for expressing political opinions and frustrations. The abrupt blackout felt like a violation, a sudden, forceful silencing of the national conversation. The initial moments were filled with confusion and disbelief. People rebooted their routers. People checked their data plans. People messaged friends asking, "Is your Facebook down too?" The realization spread like wildfire through alternative channels. The government had built a digital wall around its citizens. This action was unprecedented for Nepal's modern democracy. The government didn't take long to provide its official justification for this sweeping social media ban. In a press conference that was broadcast on state television, the Minister for Information and Communications laid out the administration's case. He spoke of the need to protect national sovereignty and social harmony. He cited the spread of misinformation and fake news as a grave threat to the country's stability. The government argued these platforms were being used to incite hatred. They said platforms were being used to defame respected individuals and to undermine public institutions. The official narrative painted a picture of a nation on the brink of chaos. Foreign forces were allegedly using social media to destabilize Nepal. The ban was presented as a necessary and patriotic act of defense. These official explanations were met with widespread skepticism and derision. For years, the same platforms had been used to organize earthquake relief. They'd been used to promote local tourism and to foster a sense of national unity. So many felt a blanket ban was a disproportionate and punitive response. The timing was highly suspicious. The ban came as the government faced intense scrutiny over corruption allegations and over its handling of the economy. The reaction online, through the channels that remained open like VPNs, was immediate and furious, and through encrypted messaging apps. The hashtag #Nepal Internet Shutdown began trending globally. Inside Nepal, people used creative methods to circumvent the ban. Technology-savvy youth shared tutorials on how to install and use VPNs. The transition from online anger to offline protest was remarkably swift. The same digital tools that the government sought to suppress became the primary instruments for organizing physical demonstrations. Secure messaging apps were abuzz logistical planning, mapping out protest routes, designating meeting points. The first protests were small and spontaneous, more like flash mobs than organized marches. A few dozen students might gather at a busy intersection in Kathmandu, holding up handmade signs, "Give us back our Facebook." Democracy is not a virus. These initial gatherings were crucial. They tested the government's resolve, showed the public that physical protest was possible. They broke the initial fear and inertia that often accompanies a government crackdown. University students, recent graduates. For them, the digital world was as real and as important as the physical one. The social media ban was not just an inconvenience, it was an attack on their identity. It was an attack on their future. Holding up a blank piece of paper. This represented the censorship they were fighting against. The chants were growing louder every day. What began as a youth-led movement quickly broadened, drawing in an astonishingly diverse cross-section of Nepali society. It was no longer just students in the streets, shopkeepers who lost their primary means of advertising their goods, artists, writers, musicians, lawyers, human rights activists, elderly citizens marching, teenagers with smartphones, a powerful testament to the breadth of the opposition. This diversity was the movement's greatest strength. Restore social media. It was seen as a symptom of a deeper problem. Authoritarianism, corruption, failure to deliver on promises. Down with censorship. End corruption. Prime Minister resign. The protest transformed from a single-issue campaign into a full-blown anti-government movement. People brought their own specific grievances, creating a tapestry of dissent. The Nepal Bar Association held a silent protest outside the Supreme Court. The Federation of Nepali Journalists marched with black gags over their mouths. Taxi drivers organized a slow-moving convoy that clogged the capital's main arteries. It showed the opposition was not a chaotic mob, but organized, determined citizens. the government was facing a multi-front assault on its legitimacy from every corner of society. The daily rhythm of protest began to take a heavy toll on the government and the capital city. What started as localized gatherings had morphed into massive, citywide demonstrations that could no longer be contained. The sheer number of people on the streets was, honestly, staggering. On some days, the main ring road of Kathmandu was a sea of people, stretching for kilometers. The government's initial strategy of waiting out the protesters had clearly failed. The movement was not losing momentum, it was gaining it. Each day, more people felt emboldened to join, their fear replaced by a sense of collective power and purpose. The protests created a sense of inevitability, a feeling that change was not just possible, but imminent. The economic impact of the sustained protests became a major source of pressure. With major thoroughfares blocked daily, the supply chain into the Kathmandu Valley was severely disrupted. Shops remained closed, not only in solidarity, but also because it was impossible to conduct business. The tourism sector, already fragile, was hit hard as images of protests were broadcast internationally. The government, which had staked its reputation on delivering economic prosperity, was now presiding over a city that was grinding to a halt. This economic pain began to create divisions within the business community and even within the ruling party itself. Members who had previously supported the prime minister started to worry that his stubbornness was causing irreparable damage to the nation's economy. The international reaction also added to the pressure on the Oli administration. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch. Major democratic governments, traditionally friendly to Nepal, began to express their concerns through diplomatic channels. While these statements were carefully worded, the message was clear: the world was watching, and Nepal's democratic reputation was on the line. Foreign aid remittances. The government was becoming increasingly isolated, both at home and abroad, a pariah in the eyes of the global democratic community. Faced with a movement that refused to die down, the Oli government's response became erratic and desperate panic inside Singha Durbar. Defiant rhetoric, clumsy attempts at conciliation, PM's fiery TV speech accusing protesters of being foreign agents, accusing them of being traitors, a government spokesperson hinting at dialogue. The offer was vague and conditional. Inconsistent messaging, the government was losing control. It made the administration look weak and indecisive, which only emboldened the protesters. The state's security apparatus was under immense strain. For the most part, the protests were peaceful, but there were sporadic clashes from heavy-handed police. The government ordered mass arrests intended to intimidate. Jails began to fill with students. Jails began to fill with activists. Jails began to fill with ordinary citizens. The tactic backfired. The arrests created martyrs for the movement. Images of students being dragged by riot police started circulating on the very platforms the government had tried to block, fueling global condemnation and a wave of domestic outrage. The sustained public pressure from the streets acted as a powerful catalyst, really accelerating a political crisis that had been simmering within Nepal's ruling party for months. Prime Minister Oli's leadership style had already created significant resentment among other senior leaders of the Nepal Communist Party. His tendency to make unilateral decisions to bypass party committees to reward loyalists had alienated some powerful factions. The social media ban and the subsequent public uprising provided rival factions the perfect opportunity to challenge his authority. They framed their power struggle as a principled stand for democracy and as a response to the people's will. The street protests gave them political cover to make their move. The tipping point came when key coalition partners began to publicly waver in their support for Oli. These smaller parties were crucial to the government's majority and were feeling pressure from their constituencies. Local leaders and voters were part of the protests and couldn't be seen propping up an increasingly unpopular prime minister. They began issuing public statements calling for the government to respect democratic norms and to find a political solution. Not outright threats to quit the coalition, but clear warning shots across the prime minister's bow. His parliamentary foundation started to crumble. The political endgame was in sight. In his final days in office, Prime Minister Oli found himself, completely cornered. The trust was broken. Finally, on a cool evening in late 2025, the news broke. The Prime Minister's office announced Oli had submitted his resignation to the president. On television, he remained defiant, blaming foreign conspiracies. He portrayed himself as a victim, a patriot brought down by hostile forces. The man who had tried to silence the nation had been silenced by the very voices he sought to suppress. The resignation of Prime Minister Oli was met with, well, an explosion of celebration across Nepal. The streets of Kathmandu had been arenas of protest but were suddenly transformed into a massive, joyous party. People danced, people sang, people chanted slogans, not of anger but of victory. Strangers hugged each other, sharing relief and accomplishment. It was a powerful, cathartic moment for the nation. The people had spoken and they had been heard. In a democracy, the ultimate source of power resides with the people. This political earthquake, sparked by a social media ban, taught Nepal about the modern nature of power and protest. It showed digital rights are inseparable from human rights. Attempts to control information did not bring stability, they sparked revolution. The youth of Nepal, armed with smartphones and VPNs, became a political force. In the aftermath, a new coalition government formed, promising transparency and accountability. Its first act, restore all social media platforms, a symbolic gesture. A new generation found its political voice and power. The legacy of 2025 is how ordinary citizens, united and empowered by technology, can create extraordinary change. The political earthquake subsided, but it permanently altered the landscape of power, leaving a more aware, engaged, and empowered citizenry.